Welcome to the Heartful Parent Podcast. I'm your host, Christy Keating. In this podcast, we talk about it all, our parenting, our partnering, and our professional lives, because they are all a part of us, and we were never meant to do this alone. Hello, friends, and welcome back to the Heartful Parent Podcast. I have such a treat in store for you today. I've been looking forward to this interview since the podcast started, and it's finally here, and I'm really excited to introduce you to Laura Danger. Now, if you don't know that name, Laura Danger, you might know her under her Instagram handle, which is That Darn Chat. She's got a phenomenal Instagram page with, tens and tens of thousands of followers who tune in and listen to what she has to say about relationships and women and invisible labor and sort of the structure that we have set up in our world. Laura is a licensed educator. She was a teacher for many years. She's also a coach. And as you will be able to tell from her social media, a really prolific and thoughtful content creator. She also, like me, is a certified Fair Play Facilitator, and she's been facilitating and educating in Chicago for over 12 years. She has advanced endorsements in the areas of English as a second language and in learning disabilities. And in her current work, she facilitates workshops, retreats, and also coaches individuals and couples, all while she is creating tons of educational content in an effort and in a mission to create a more equitable world. Laura is really passionate about domestic equity, the value of domestic labor, and how empowerment out in the world starts with empowerment at home. She talks about this in such a brilliant way. And in this conversation, we originally had planned to talk about fair play. We are both fair play facilitators. And I'm going to be honest, we took this conversation in a little bit of a different direction. We circle back and come back to fair play at the end, but we really dig into some of the messaging that we as moms in particular, but parents in general, get from our culture, and the sort of origins of mom guilt and how that kind of interlaces with shame and, safety and all of these things. And I think it's such a fun but also kind of empowering, eye-opening conversation. Now, I want to give you a few words of warning for those of you who know me or have listened to the podcast or heard me in other contexts. I'm not going to lie, I do love an occasionally well-placed cuss word. And there are a few in this episode. So, content warning, if you've got a kiddo with you and you don't want them learning new vocabulary, you might want to wait on this episode. If you are highly offended by swearing, this might not be the perfect episode for you. But, if you're on your own, you don't have kiddos around, and you can, hear a swear word or two, I think you're really going to love this conversation. There's just a lot that Laura brings to the table to think about. And so without further ado, my friend Laura Danger. All right. Welcome, Laura. I'm so excited to have you on the Heartful Parent Podcast. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. I am also very excited to talk.
I mean, you and I have talked before, and, we're both Fair Play Facilitators. But before we kind of dig into Fair Play, I want to start with some things that you've been talking about on Instagram recently, because we are not living in a normal time. I don't know what normal means, but we're not living in a time that feels okay for a lot of us as women, and for men too. Many men are recognizing that where we are isn't okay. And you said something recently on Instagram, and I want to let you like run with this because it was so validating and just kind of profound. And the idea that when we as women get frustrated because we feel like we're taking on too much of the work in our households, we sort of turn that frustration into shame because we think there's something wrong with us. Is there something wrong with us? And I asked that tongue in cheek. I mean, I know the answer, but I want to hear you talk about it.
No, of course there's nothing. There's nothing wrong with us. Our system sucks. Everything from the 40-hour work week to, we have affordable housing, healthcare attached to jobs, no paid leave, childcare costs are wild. All of that is rough. But the specific thing that you're talking about, the video that I made, I was referencing the way that women are made out to be nags, and specifically the way that it is laughed at. And so I have been thinking a lot about, like, where did my mom guilt come from? Why I spent a decade with my husband, who now I think we've been together like 14 years ish. I spent a decade doing too much and doing more than him. Anytime a new task would hit the family's plate, I put it on my plate. And I would go through these cycles of like getting super pissed off, blowing up, and then it would go back to that is not balanced, but like this steady simmer of anger for like 3 more weeks, and then it would happen again. And I was thinking to myself, why did I do that? And I kind of connected the dots recently with, I spent my entire life seeing that frustration as a joke, as humor. The naggy mom, the woman who pulls her hair out, and we all laugh. There's a laugh track on the sitcoms. Yeah. And so I would feel that way. And then I would think, oh, that's silly. That's frivolous feeling. That's not something to actually take seriously. And so I was trying to figure out how to marry these two ideas. And instead I just felt like, oh, well, if I'm stressed about something that isn't a big deal, it must mean that there's something bad about me.
I relate to that. And I think there are I can just think of so many people in my own life who will probably hear this and think, oh, that makes so much sense. Right. And I mean, I can think of all the sitcoms, right, where the naggy mom, the naggy wife is made a joke of, and we all laugh, right? We've all laughed at that because we do it without even thinking about what the bigger picture is to that. But then when it's in our lives, we're like, this actually doesn't feel funny.
Right. And there's all throughout social media, and this is what I talk about mostly on my social media platforms, is the way that these jokes, or the way that we make light of these things, the actual consequence is that everything stays the same.
Right.
So a lot of times there's a difference between seeing something that is hurtful and joking about it in a way that is pointing at the oppressor or pointing at the oppressive system. Like, isn't it so funny that women have to caretake men in a workplace in order to get a promotion? There are books that poke fun at that, but it's poking fun at the system. And then there is this social media thing that happens with couples comedy and mommy content that isn't poking fun at the system. It's poking fun at her.
Yeah.
And that's real harmful, in my opinion.
Well, I mean, it perpetuates this whole idea that we just need to suck it up and get it done.
Yes.
And you were just talking a minute ago, like in the first 10 years of your marriage or being together with your husband, that when a new task came onto your plate, the family's plate, you put it on yours. And so when we have that, like, I just have to suck it up and get it done kind of belief, then eventually our plate, it's going to break. It cannot hold it all.
Yeah. And I don't know if you or listeners have had this experience, but I say that something would hit the family plate. And what I think the real experience of being a woman or falling under this mother umbrella or primary caregiver, when you are the house manager, domestic engineer, primary caregiver, the family plate is your plate. There is no differentiation.
True.
Whatever enters the door, you either need to delegate it or make a plan for, or figure it in. And it's always this thought like, oh, because you're the keeper of the knowledge, it only makes sense that you would be the best person to make this decision. But the weight of that's what was really hard for me. And what in the last couple of years I've really had to face in myself is I thought I was better at it. I probably was better at it, but I wasn't seeing the value, the stress, the pressure of if I don't get this right, my kids are going to be messed up. My husband's going to be frustrated and stressed at work. And I was like totally fine with absorbing that because I thought it was my responsibility.
That word absorbing like really catches my attention because I feel like, and this is not intended to like bash men. I have an amazing husband and, many of us do. And many of us have husbands who are as much a victim of this system as we are. So I just want to preface that for anyone who's listening. But I also think that we as women, we have to acknowledge that we live in a culture where we are expected to absorb the anger, the tasks, that like so many things for men, as if we are sponges that are like with infinite capability to just keep sucking that up, right?
Yes.
And that does have a huge cost on all of us.
I'm reading Rose Hackman's book, Emotional Labor, right now, which just came out. And it is so brilliant because she talks about the many ways that we ignore this labor. But I know something that maybe we were going to touch on, I would love to talk about is the way that, in my opinion, we start out very young, learning when a boy pulls your hair, maybe he likes you, but also boys will just be boys. And so instead of trying to hold men accountable or little boys accountable, we ask women to accommodate for misbehavior of boys. And this just continues to go all the way up into adulthood. These are social norms. I think recognizing the context relieves a little bit of pressure of, oh, if I'm accidentally acting this out in my relationship, it's not because I'm flawed or broken. This is a structure that's been put in place. And so even if I'm not afraid of a man for my physical safety or in any way, there is this core belief inside of me that it is my responsibility to accommodate the feelings and the comfort of men above my own. And then when I'm a mom, the comfort of my kids above my own, my boss above my own. And so even if it's not a reality that it's not a safe environment, we are like conditioned into this situation.
For sure. And I think we have to distinguish there's like physical safety and then there's emotional, like mental safety, right? And there may be a lot of people who are in physically safe relationships, but where the absorbing of all of that is not healthy. That's not an emotionally safe place to be. But I also really appreciate what you pointed out about like this starts from a really, really young age, really young. And I remember reading a story, this was years ago, when I was a pretty new mom, and it was, I'm not going to remember all the details. It was somebody on Facebook. I'm in a number of Facebook groups that are for lawyers who are also moms, right? Because my background is as a lawyer. And this mom was talking about her daughter who had been at school, and the boy behind her was snapping her bra. And she was, daughter had tried to get this boy to stop. He wouldn't. And fortunately, daughter told mom was aware enough to say like, okay, this isn't okay. But when she then tried to do something about this and get this behavior to stop, it was met with like the kind of boys will be boys attitude, right? And that is assaultive behavior. That's assault, right? I mean, maybe not something that a criminal prosecutor would file charges on, and certainly not with a 10-year-old, but it is in the end assaultive behavior. And it's what turns into a more escalated form of assaultive behavior when these kids are led to believe that for the boys that that's okay, and for the girls that they have to absorb it.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And it goes with certain cultures, certain groups very much make it a girl's responsibility to act modestly, as to not tempt boys or men. And I know that we just went through this with my own kid who was being picked on by a little boy. And I struggle with what to do with that, because as an adult woman, I do know that there is a risk to my safety. If a man makes a pass at me at a bar and he's bigger than me, there's a physical risk to making him feel embarrassed or making him upset in any kind of way. But I also want my 6-year-old not to feel like she even has to go to a teacher. But in my opinion, I would like her to know that she can match the energy
yes,
of a little boy who comes at her and calls her a name, that she can, at the same volume, in a direct manner, tell him to his face to kindly F off.
Yep.
Do not touch me. This is my body. I told you not to touch me. And I want her to feel, because I didn't always feel that I could do that.
Yeah.
I want her to, and my parents encourage me. I don't like my parents definitely, but I exist in a society where other things taught me.
Right.
But I want to be, at least in my home, telling her that you are allowed to, you don't have to protect some little boy's feelings.
That
if he's
100%.
hurting you, you can tell him to stop.
Yep. Yeah. When I've talked to my girls about it, and I have a 6-year-old, and then I also have a teenager at this point. And I remember talking to my older daughter as she's been growing up. And of course, we're now starting those conversations with my younger one. Like, you have my full permission to physically fight back if you need to. And I will back you up from here to Sunday, right? That's just not going to be an issue. Now, I mean, I obviously say use your words first, right? Like, you can turn around and say, don't do that. But if that person, whoever it is, right, you have the right to stop someone from touching your body, period, end of story. But you're right. Like, that's messaging that I got as a kid from my parents and that I'm passing on. And yet we are all sort of stuck in this larger cultural context that can make that so hard. Here's the optimist in me. I think because of conversations like this and just this greater awareness, I'm hoping that we're sort of at this inflection point culturally. I've got my fingers crossed for that we're starting to see a shift, but we are also seeing an increase in sexual assaults. So, I don't know what you do with that.
It is really tough. Every time I talk to other women or other people in marginalized groups who have experienced danger, including children, of course, as you know, children are a marginalized, oppressed group. It's almost like I know that other women are going to come to back me up if I am in danger, because there is this interesting different threshold of risk. And I personally have been pondering a lot on how men deal with safety with themselves and each other, and how when I learned to accommodate and comfort men for my own safety, whether it was emotional or physical, because of course I've been called lots of names by little boys too.
Right.
I think that men learn a different way of protecting themselves, which is also believing that other men are incapable of change, or that it is risky to hold other men accountable.
Yes.
And I think the whole thing just keeps everything the same.
Yeah. Ugh.
And that's the part where I do feel like teaching my daughter at a young age, and I'm hoping that the people who are raising little boys are doing the same thing, to be brave, to speak up. If another child comes to them, that it's okay to be wrong. It's totally fine to feel upset or feel remorseful and then to apologize. Same with, I'm teaching my kid the same thing.
Yeah, me too.
I am hoping that collectively we are teaching everybody that it's all right to change and grow and yell back.
Yes. Well, and that's I know that's part of the mission of the work that you do and the work that I do, which is, if we can affect enough little corners of the world, eventually those corners are going to meet, right? Mm-hmm. And we can start to create this much more systemic change, because I think we all deserve better. I think our boys deserve better. This is damaging to them too, the way that we teach them to deal with anger. And, I listened to, there was another video on your Instagram that I saw of this man, and he was there with his wife, and it looked like they were being interviewed on a podcast or of some sort. They were being interviewed, and he was talking with a great deal of pride about how he could never be a mom. Mm-hmm. That was his word. He could never be a mom because he will not change a diaper. He will not get up in the middle of the night. Of course, my rage bubbled up as I listened to the absurdity of this man, and frankly, his partner, for not saying, "What the fuck, dude?" Right? But sorry for the language, listeners. But but I also, when I was able to kind of pause, I thought, wow, there's a lot of people in that family, group that are losing out here, because he is losing out on the experience of connecting and bonding with his children. And his children are losing out on the experience of having an engaged, involved dad. And they are losing out because they're being raised with this familial attitude of the relative place in the world of men and women. And that there's sadness to be had in all of that, along with the anger at, his ridiculous pride and his refusal to participate in the work of the family.
Yeah, you make such a good point. We teach men that fathering is like being physically present, and sometimes not even that. It's bringing home a paycheck, being physically available if there's a break-in, smashing spiders, things like that. But again, you're well versed in this. I'm sure you have experts talk about this all the time, but I hear the argument on the internet mostly. I don't think I have men in my life who actually talk like this, but divorced dads will say, my wife tore my family apart, removed me from my children's lives, and that's so wrong. And they say they'll often cite statistics about how children with fathers do better. Mm-hmm. But I was looking into that, and what's really interesting is there's data that shows that having a secure and emotionally available adult is an indicator of, it lowers risk of being a victim of violence, sexual promiscuity, and high risk sexual behaviors, things like that. And it's so interesting to me because it's such a disconnect. What would be really helpful is if you got divorced and went to therapy and learn how to emotionally regulate. And then you can be a really strong father in your child's life. Just being a guy who is around doesn't, that's not good for you. That doesn't solve your loneliness. That doesn't actually create loving bonds. That's not great. But it's the security, the safety, the active listening. Those are the things. And being able to say sorry, teaching your kids that you can say sorry.
Yes.
It's very interesting to me.
That reminds me of so Dr. Dan Siegel and Dr. Tina Payne Bryson wrote a book called The Power of Showing Up. in that, they identify what they call the 4 S's, which is safe, seen, soothed, and secure. And what the research shows is that if a child has at least one safe adult in their life who can make them feel safe, and that's both physically and emotionally, right? Mentally, because we can actually never hit our children, but still be the source of fear and threat for them. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then seeing like their inner landscape, like who they really are, and then soothe, like, do we show up for them in a meaningful way when they need that soothing, and then teach them through our own actions how to self-soothe. And then secure, which is that sort of belief that they are safe and they fit and they belong in the world. And then when we couple those 4 S's with, as you said, making repairs, right? Knowing how to say you're sorry when you screw up. That's how we form secure attachment, according to Dr. Siegel and Bryson. And that just fits so nicely with what you just said, because if all parents could learn how to do that, for their kids, whether they are with their partner, the other parent or not, we'd be in a really different place. But you have to make yourself safe, seen, soothed, and secure before you can make a child feel those things, right?
Yeah. I was just, as you're talking, I'm thinking about how important it is. And you know what? I think that this is work that I've done on myself. Whatever behaviors and thoughts I had about myself that got me to think like I am protecting myself by overperforming for everybody else, taking on all of this emotional, mental, physical labor as a way. And what is that? Anxious attachment?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yes.
So just constantly just being like, I don't need anyone else. I got this handled, and just creating distance from everybody. Or that's avoidant attachment.
Right. Well, they both come into play, I think. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I was exhibiting all of those behaviors, and it has taken me the support of a wonderful therapist and lots of self-reflection I try to model that for my own kids, but that's the hardest thing about parenting, is constantly being like, oh no, Laura, stop. Like you're falling back on your old behaviors. Please model it for them. So it's a lot of apologizing. I shouldn't have done that. I shouldn't have behaved. I'm trying to work on this. How could I have done better? Tiring.
It is tiring, but I also think that might be the single best marker for what I think of as a good parent, which is a parent who is willing to be self-reflective, to like examine their own role in whatever dynamic is happening and make apologies when they need to. Like, I feel like if we can do those things, we will be miles ahead of where many of our parents were, where many of our peers are. Like, there's a million good ways to be a parent, but I think those two things, have to be in the mix.
I'm working on it.
We all are. We all are. It's way easier said than done. I'm curious, as we're talking about this, and this is kind of a personal question, but you mentioned like you've been with your partner for 14-ish years. My husband and I have been together for 16. No, we've been together for almost 20, married for 16. And you said the first decade you spent with this kind of frustration, shame cycle, right? Where you minimized your own feelings or thought of it kind of as a joke and like, why can't I do this? Mm-hmm. And then some things shifted. Like, what happened that shift took place?
I think it was a series of events, but I had my second child. She was maybe 9 months when we went into that first lockdown. I got laid off 5 days into maternity leave with her.
Oh.
And so I went and I was the primary breadwinner and the person who we got our health insurance through. So I panicked, and 10 days postpartum, went on an interview, accepted the first job that they gave me. And so I had a second child. I had a toddler at home. I spent the summer trying to recover physically, jumped straight into the emotional work of adapting to a new work environment and nursing at school, trying to have a new position. all of this like snowball effect into the pandemic. And then teaching from home remotely with an infant and a toddler, and my husband's still working full time. His job was not, the hours were not affected. No childcare, total chaos. I had already been stressed out and feeling overwhelmed and underwater, and was going through these cycles of arguments with my partner. When that hit, for the first year of the pandemic, I was in a constant state of burnout, physically, emotionally unwell. And I, at one point, with a series of work issues hitting me, I had had enough. I was like, I need to, I don't know. I'm going to burst. I'm going to go up in flames. I have no idea what to do with this. And basically, it wasn't that my husband wasn't willing at all. It was that I could not get out of my own way. I couldn't see the cost that, like, going back to some like simmer between, no more simmer, full boil all the time. And that's what I needed to do. I needed to be so fed up and pissed off and hold a boundary.
Yeah.
It's literally all it took was, it's not like, I can't say all it took. I had to convince myself that the boundary was worth it, because what I was doing was unsustainable.
I think you touch on such an important thing there. First of all, I mean, I think that experience that you just described, maybe the nuance of it, like losing your job 5 days into maternity leave, which is complete BS. Like, not everyone will have had that experience, but certainly that, like, working from home with no childcare during a pandemic with young children and feeling, as you said, overwhelmed and underwater. I think we're still seeing, and will continue to see for quite some time, the emotional, mental health fallouts from that experience for a lot of parents, women in particular. I just think that is so relatable. And when you talk about, part of the hardest thing was recognizing that holding that boundary was worth it, right? The sort of like knowing your why, and recognizing that you had to get out of your own way, which it is so easy for us to talk about men and the issues there, because there are many, but we perpetuate this system as well. So can you talk a little bit about that, getting out of our own way, and what we need to do to, I don't know, have that same sort of realization, or how do we get out of our own way? Maybe that's the question, which may be a tough one to answer.
It is. It's a big question. I mean, you and I are both Fair Play certified, and Fair Play is a really excellent tool for finding language and a framework and a system that works to just the practical side of dividing and communicating about domestic labor. It's a very good tool. Some of the criticism that I've heard is, I feel so frustrated that I have to be the one to bring this up. I know the author Eve Rodsky talks about this a lot, and I think we all have our own experiences with this. I also love Nedra Glover Tawwab, who writes Set Boundaries, Find Peace.
I love that book.
So good. And really, I think the anger, the frustration of having to be the one to self-advocate, at least for me, is fuel enough. And looking around and realizing that, my job was benefiting off of my free labor.
Mm-hmm.
I was a teacher. I left my teaching career. My community was benefiting off of my free emotional and mental labor with fundraising and volunteering. The more context I gained for who wanted me to not hold that boundary, the more pissed off I got. And every time I'd be like, oh, you know what? Like, maybe I shouldn't hire a babysitter. I did. It's fine. I'll be fine. I'll take a bath after the kids are in bed. I'll just scroll for a while. It's like, no, this is a bigger issue than that. I don't want this world for my kids. And neither does my partner, realistically. And here's the thing. Not everybody's partner is going to get on board. But anytime I talk to a client, a friend, someone in my comment section, and I say, okay, what's the risk of bringing this up? My partner could tell me no. My partner could make me feel guilty or do things that I feel guilty in response. This could end badly. I could get a divorce. I could separate. The follow-up question to that is, what's the risk of not?
Yeah.
And that was what it was for me, was I was so tired. The risk of watching my kids see me deplete myself, burning to an absolute crisp, hating my job, hating myself, hating my partner, being angry and on edge in front of my kids. I could not do that anymore. And the risk of not holding a boundary was higher than the risk of doing it.
Yeah. I love that way of thinking about it. I think when people ask that question, what if you already feel guilty. You already have a partner that won't do it. So like you kind of end up in the same place. And now you have more information about what's a healthy place for you to be. I've said to clients who worry that their partners won't get on board or are angry that they're the ones that have to bring it up. And it's sort of one of those, like, two things can be true at once. Yes, you should not have to be the only one to recognize and bring this up. I will validate that. And if he's not going to bring it up, somebody has to, right? So it's kind of the, like, would you rather be right or would you rather be happy question? I mean, that's not a perfect analogy, but it's like, yes, you're absolutely right that you shouldn't be the only one who cares about this. If he's not bringing it up, the only way forward is to decide that your mental and physical health matters enough that you're going to do it anyway.
And that's what a boundary is. If you're making rules or demands, and I did that for a long time, not incredibly helpful. I still catch myself doing it pretty frequently, but a boundary is about what your limit is. And women are convinced through many aspects, including the little boys who pull your hair and you're told to adapt and have malleable expectations and boundaries. We're taught that boundaries are not a good thing to have.
Yes.
So it's really hard. That's the hardest work, is saying, no, you said you were going to help. And when it doesn't get done the way it's supposed to get done, that you agreed to get it done, I'm not going to do it for you. This is my boundary. My boundary is this. I can only, in response to this thing, I am going to control what I'm going to control for myself.
Yeah.
And that's so hard. Get your friends behind you.
It is so hard. It is so hard. I have to say, like, one of the motivating things for me, and I've heard you say this today, is that idea of, like, what I want or don't want for my own kids. Because some of us have a hard time thinking of our own needs as worthy of setting the boundary around. So saying, it's funny because I often ask clients when we're talking about that self-care piece, because we parent better when we take care of ourselves, right? When we're not overwhelmed and underwater. And I'll ask them, like, when your daughter grows up, or your son, whoever, do you want to walk in their home and look at your daughter and think, wow, good job. You're putting everyone else before you. You're getting no time for yourself. You're totally exhausted and depleted, right? Is that what we want for our girls, for our children? And of course, I've never had a client say, yeah, I totally want that for my kid, right? They all say, well, no, I definitely don't want that for them. And then we talk about, well, how do children learn? Right. And it's from what we're modeling for them. And if we deplete and exhaust ourselves 24/7, then they're being taught that that's the way that they have to do it. I want so desperately for my girls to learn this well before I did. I just turned 50. I finally feel like, and part of it's through doing the work that I'm doing, and I'm sure this is true for you too, that learning how to set those boundaries has become it's reinforced through what I talk about with people. And I feel like I'm finally at that age where I'm like, screw it. I have 0 F's to give anymore. I'm going to set what I need to. And I don't want my children or your children or anybody's children to have to wait till they're 50 or 40 or whatever to feel like they're entitled to do that.
And that is a shift I see. And we do focus on young girls a lot. And I just kind of like very quickly want to add on to what you were saying about what our young girls see. Also, I do think that little boys who don't see domestic care, they'll watch moms, grandmas, aunts like doing this work and see themselves as helpers, like helping out in the kitchen and things like that. But because they don't as often on TV and media, maybe it is in their own home, but they don't explicitly see men bringing value to the home in these loving, caring, emotionally present ways. Everybody, little boys especially, need to learn how to go to men for comfort and see what that sort of, seeing men have platonic love, watching men in their relationships change and grow and accept that. I think that's like even more important than women have been doing this work. We've known that this is work, but it's very important that men in our lives are also really showing up.
Yeah. So true. You talked a little bit about fair play, and I just want to take just a couple of minutes to talk about that to kind of round out this conversation. Because as you said, it's a really great structure. It's not the solution to everything, but it does give tools. Can you just talk a little bit more about what that system is and maybe even a bit about how it kind of got you and your partner out of that decade-long pattern?
Sure. And please jump in if I miss anything. So Fair Play is a book written by Eve Rodsky. And in my opinion, the basis of it, it's a system, it's shared language, it's a framework of talking about and dividing domestic labor. But what makes it unique from a lot of how we've understood this labor is that it's a collaborative conversation. It's an explicit conversation. You are encouraged to have values-based conversations, come to joined standards, which, we always hear, her standards are too high. I don't want to,
right.
I try it and I do it wrong. And this is more like, okay, well, how should we do it? Let's decide. And the basis of it is that there are about 100 tasks in a household. You can adapt that however it works for your household. And, you can get a card deck, you can get a printable. You fully own full ownership of a task. And so you can divide it in a way that feels fair for your household. But instead of like what happened to me, I have this plate. Okay, now I have it. Now I'm going to tell you how to do it, give you directions, book the appointment so you can drive the kid there. It is one person, and the term she uses is CPE, owns the entire thing, the conception. So thinking, I need to do this thing. The planning, how am I going to do it? Let's talk to all the shareholders. And then execution. And that's where, it's the list making. Hey, can you do this for me? No more.
Yes.
Now with Fair Play, you are fully responsible from noticing, planning, organizing, executing the whole thing.
Yeah. I want to just say something on that, because I think a lot of women that I talk to are like, no, my husband is great. Like he does a lot. I believe them. But what I find when we kind of dig into it is that their partners are really participatory in the execution phase of it, but they are still carrying all of that mental load, the conception and the planning. And that's not to say husbands, dads, partners don't do the execution. It's just like it creates more equity when we can hand over those first two pieces too.
Exactly. That's where that invisible frustration, the simmer, the 3 weeks of simmer before the blow up, that's where that comes from.
Yeah.
Because you know what? Inevitably, to your point, the conversation goes, I do so much around here. I do the laundry, I do the dishes, I sweep up when you tell me to, I run errands, I pick up groceries. The list goes on. And then that just, for me, that just fed into my shame. I was like, you do so much around here and still I'm pissed. And so like, we're both right. We're both fully correct there, but there's so much more underneath the surface that we need to address.
Oh, yes. And I think that's kind of an awesome place to end our conversation, because it's just that recognition that both things can be true, right? Both things can be true. Laura, I am so grateful for this conversation. I know we kind of went all over, and I love that we were able to talk about some of the roots of all of this. I'm really grateful for the work that you're putting out into the world. Your Instagram page is amazing. I'm sure you deal with a lot of great comments and a lot of haters on there. But you've also got a really big project in the works. Can you just take a minute and tell us about it?
I would love to. Thank you. I am writing a book. It is titled No More Mediocre. And I'm hoping to, combine some of my own story from people that I work with and stories from the people in my comment section and who reach out to me on a daily basis, because we've got to create the context and also give ourselves permission to burn it down and build something new.
I can't wait for this book to come out. I will be one of the first people to buy it. I know it's it's still a work in progress, but I know there will be a lot of people excited to read what you've got to say.
Thank you so much. I really
Laura, thank you.
Support.
Thank you for being on the podcast. It was really great to have you.
Thanks for having me.
Oh my goodness. I hope that you enjoyed that conversation as much as I did. It was a fun one to have. I am really in awe of how well Laura phrases things and kind of the depth which she thinks about things. If you are not following her on Instagram, trust me, you want to be doing that. And I'm so excited for her book, which I know is a ways out from landing on the shelves, given that she's still in the writing process. But I think it'll be one more fantastic way that she kind of starts to shift the narrative and shift the culture, which, I know she and I both want to be a part of that. Thank you so much for listening. We will be back next week with some more great content for you. And in the meantime, if you enjoyed this conversation or have been enjoying the podcast as a whole, please take a moment and drop a review. Share a few words with your thoughts. Give us 5 stars. And if you don't think it deserves 5 stars, email me. Let me know why and what you think we could do better. All right. Thank you so much. I'll see you next week, everyone.